All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Audio Signal Podcast. As you know, lately I've been repositioning the antenna. It used to be about everything. It got me curious, and then I decided that there were a little too much. I would say yes to everybody that wanted to come on the show because I'm curious about everything. And one thing I really like is storytelling, and I like to use this opportunity to get to meet the storytellers and see what's their story. So as you can tell, it's all about stories. And sometimes you want to ask for a good story, because maybe if you don't ask, you're going to get the answer that maybe you were not looking for. So I'm simplifying the title of this book that we're going to talk about today with these three letters, ask, and one simple verb that I think has a lot embedded in it. And to do that, of course, if you're watching the video, you already said it, is Jeff Wetzler, which is the author, here with me. And if you're listening, it's true, he's here. Jeff, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, Marco. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I was very intrigued when the book was presented to me. I haven't read it because I don't travel in the future yet, so it hasn't published yet. It will be soon after this conversation has been released. But it was intriguing. So we'll get there. Let's start with you. Who is Jeff?
Great. So Jeff Wetzler, I am a father, husband, son, brother, and also I co-lead an organization called Transcend, which is an education innovation organization that I co-founded in 2015 together with Elon Samoa. And I'm also the author of this book, Ask, Tap into the Hidden Wisdom of People Around You for Unexpected Breakthroughs in Leadership and Life.
So, like I said at the beginning, a short verb, a lot to pack into that, right?
Yes.
So, you decided to write this book because somebody asked you to do that?
This is a book that has been in me probably for 20 or 30 years in some form or another. I've basically spent my entire career focused on one question, which is how can we make learning experiences deeper, more powerful, more enduring and sticky for people? I've done that in a variety of contexts, from K-12 education with kids all the way through corporate, Fortune 500 companies and everything in between. And one pattern that I have both observed but also personally experienced myself as a person and as a leader is this pattern of what I call the unspoken, which is that we are all surrounded by people in our lives. That might be our friends or our partners or coworkers or our customers. And those people, to your point about stories, they are filled with experiences, ideas, perspectives, stories, feedback for us that too often we never hear. To use your language, our antenna is not tuned to it and we don't pick it up, and we miss that signal. And if we could actually tune in to their stories, we would all be better off. We would have better relationships. We would make better decisions together. We would save time. We'd be more creative. But we don't, because they don't tell us. And so the book is really trying to tackle the problem. To your question, the reason I wrote the book is because I care a lot about this problem. I care a lot about learning. And anytime there's a missed learning opportunity, for me, that's kind of like a micro tragedy. And so because I have discovered that there's actually something we can do to solve this problem, and I've benefited from many mentors and teachers who have taught me a lot about this problem and how to solve it, a few years ago, I wanted to pay it forward and share with others what I have benefited from. And that's what prompted me to write the book.
I love it. And it comes a lot of questions. I do some mentorship myself with a group called the Mentor Project, a nonprofit organization. So
I'm familiar. I think it's a great organization.
Oh, perfect. They're great. So I talk to them all the time. There is, astronauts in there. There is physicists. And we, of course, I get in there and I feel an imposter just to start with. But we all share a lot of story as a kind of like a lateral mentoring.
Yes.
And I realized that you may have so much knowledge, even as an astrophysicist, but it's about how then you communicate that knowledge, that transform it into an appealing story and something that could motivate people. And are you focusing more on the kids, or do you then apply this to every phase of your life? I mean, I know you mentioned leadership, so I'm imagining that applies to every.
I believe that it's applicable to every part of life. The book actually has specifically a chapter in it around how can we raise the next generation to be curious question askers so that they can elicit the stories from people around them as well. And we can talk if you want to talk more about kids. I'm very passionate about that in education, but I also see it as applying to young, adult learners too.
I want to start with the kids because,
Yeah.
Kids want stories. They go to bed, they want stories. That's how they learn the moral. We're still telling stories at, I don't know, in the 1700 and even earlier than that, maybe a little bit more watered down with not so much gore as originally.
That's right. That's right. Some of these fairy tales are quite gory.
Yeah. Wait a minute. Disney didn't say that. But well, maybe you don't want to hear the real story.
That's right.
It's good. But my point is, you feed them. And I'm going to bring an example here on how I always say, I'm not good at math. I'm more of a humanistic person. And then I look back and I'm like, well, the teacher that I had, they were really good. They make me love this because they were telling me a good story. And maybe the subject I don't like, maybe I haven't been infatuated by it because they were kind of dry the way maybe they were presented. So is this a factor that can change the direction of somebody's kid passion and develop the future?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of learning science that says if you just feed kids dry facts and information, it is not going to stick as much as if it's emotionally salient for them. And the emotional dimension of it actually helps with the, what learning scientists call the encoding of the information. And stories can be a very powerful way to make information much more emotionally. I mean, even I know myself, when I grew up as a kid, I hated history classes because it seemed like lots of facts and information, and I could never seem to remember it.
Dates and names
and whatever. But if you'd give me like a historical fiction novel where there's an actual story, I would love it. And I would remember so much more about the history because of that.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, but the other thing I'll say about kids is that kids are so naturally curious to learn other people's stories. They are just hungry to know, why did that person do that, and who is that person, and what's going to happen next, and all that kind of thing. What is interesting and I think also sad is that over time we see that curiosity decrease in most kids. There's a lot of interesting research that talks about how kids start their life, asking something like 400 questions a day. Mm-hmm. And then it dwindles as they get into grade school, down to 50, down to 20, down to by high school, almost no questions per day. And so what I talk about in the book are how can we actually rekindle that curiosity among kids so that they can continue to be those hungry learners that can pull out and elicit the stories of other people too.
Well, I have my theory on that.
Yes, what is it?
Well, I'm sure that there is no stupid question.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the kid doesn't care. You just want to know. And,
right.
and we grow up and we're still like, oh, maybe they're going to think that I don't know.
That's right.
Maybe it's stupid. Maybe I want to be the smartest person in the room. And that's usually a mistake if people talk about that.
Yeah.
So
right.
Is that why? Do we become more aware of our, I don't know, ignorance?
Yeah.
Philosophical here.
And I think kids and all of us are surrounded in most cultures, certainly here, by a society that says asking questions or looking like you don't know the answer is a sign of weakness. And going to school year after year, where the emphasis is on getting the answer right, as opposed to asking the best question. All of those subtle signals can send to kids, I just need to know things as opposed to ask questions and be curious. And I shouldn't exhibit any uncertainty because that could be a sign of, stupidity or weakness or all that kind of thing. We need to change all of that if we want to actually encourage this kind of ongoing curiosity. But I do think that's a lot of the reason why we see the dampening of curiosity in young people.
And we put that in AI too. when they hallucinate, it's because it just can't say, I don't know. It's just going to create an answer. just make it up, right?
Exactly.
Look weak.
Exactly. There's some really interesting research that I came across from the book that talks about the power of modeling for kids. If they see adults in their life who just kind of don't ask questions or act like they know everything, etc., it sends a very powerful message to kids. That's how they should behave. But if they see a teacher who says, that's interesting, I don't know, let's explore that. Right. All of a sudden it changes the kids' behavior and they start to ask a lot more questions too.
I love it. So let's get into the book. What's the methodology when people read the book and what they can get out of it?
So the methodology is called the ask approach. And it basically is trying to deal with the problem that we've been describing, which is that the people around us have such incredible stories and insights and perspectives that they're not sharing with us. And the goal of the ask approach is to really better connect with other people so that you can understand what they know, think, and feel, so that together you can make better decisions, you can collaborate better, you can save time together, all the good things that happen. And it's got 5 key steps or practices that are part of it. The first one is what I call choose curiosity. And curiosity is really all about, it's really what we've been talking about, wanting to know what I can learn from someone else. What are the most important lessons, ideas, insights, etc. And to choose curiosity, we have to break out of our own certainty. So much of the time in life, we think we've sized up another person. I know what's going on with them. I know what's going on in the situation, etc. And so this first practice, and in the book, I talk about a number of different strategies for how we can break out of this certainty trap that we're in and instead look at someone else and say, there's something I can learn from them. There's something I might be missing. They see the world differently than me. They might have ideas. They might have feedback, and really awaken our curiosity to that. That's part one. Shall I keep going to the other pieces?
I think we can do make an episode from each one of them.
I think that's right.
I'm gonna let you go and stop you like when I have a comment. But
okay,
let's go in the order.
We'll go in the order. So that's number one. Number two really has to do with making it safe for other people to tell us their stories, to tell us their insights, to give us their feedback. Because even if we're curious, and I've learned this the hard way in my work and in my life, no matter how curious I am, unless the other person actually feels safe and it's easy and comfortable and appealing for them to actually tell me what's true for them and tell me their stories, they're not going to tell me. So this is all about creating a level of connection where they actually feel that level of trust. It also is about myself opening up to them so that if they need to hear some of my stories and they need to hear some of my own vulnerability and my reasons for wanting to know from them in order for them to reciprocate and do the same. And it's about radiating resilience so they can know that I can handle their stories and their truth, that I'm not going to crumble, that I'm not going to punish them, that it's not going to damage our relationship. And so these dimensions of connection and opening up and radiating resilience are all components to making it more safe for someone to share with us. And I would say that's really especially important when we're working or talking across lines of difference, whether there's power differences in the relationship or identity differences in the relationship, because all of those differences can exacerbate people's fears about actually sharing openly.
I'm gonna jump on this one because I think I have many conversations about leadership, right? And so we'll go there. It's not a one-way communication. It's a two-way. You need to create a boardroom or a brainstorm meeting where you allow that, you encourage that. And I've seen many times exactly the opposite, where people are concerned, scared. Going back to what we're saying, am I going to ask the wrong question? Am I going to get fired because of this?
Exactly. I think it's more the norm, unfortunately, that if you had X-ray vision and you could be seeing what's really going on inside the heads of people around a table in a business meeting, what they're really thinking is, this plan is not a good idea, or I'm concerned about this, or I have a better way, or why aren't we doing it this way, or doesn't he realize that, all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't get said, and so much of that is because the leader hasn't made it safe.
Yeah.
And so that's why that step is so important.
Right. And maybe going back to the mirror in the past, that when they were a kid, they wouldn't care. Because a kid,
exactly.
It's okay for a kid not to know.
Totally. But over the years, they've accumulated all of these messages from socialization that say to them, keep it quiet, don't make waves, don't offend people, play it safe, all that kind of stuff.
But even after you graduate and you have a PhD, I mean, 20 years later, I don't remember certain things. I still have to relearn things.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's absolutely.
So it's okay. It's fine.
It's right. But we forget that.
Yeah.
So the third.
Let's go to the number 3.
Number 3 is really about actually asking the questions. This is why the book is called Ask. So many of us think we are asking questions, but our repertoire of questions is very limited. And in fact, many times things that come out of our mouth that have a question mark are not really questions. They're actually statements or suggestions disguised as questions.
Can you give me a couple of examples?
Have you considered seeing a therapist? That's kind of a question, but really, it's more like advice. Don't you think it would be better if we ate Chinese food tonight, or that kind of thing?
Right.
Those are questions technically, but they're not actually questions.
They're tricking you.
They're trick questions, really. And so in the book, I talk about a whole category of what I call crummy questions that really aren't questions that are designed to trick or maneuver or attack people. And I distinguish that from what I call quality questions. And the most important property of a quality question is that it genuinely helps you learn something from someone else. It comes from a place of authentic curiosity, and it really taps into the full story that someone else has. And there are very few of us have ever been trained on how do you actually ask questions and what are the most important questions to be asking. But there's a whole science to questions. And in this chapter of the book, I talk about questions for different kinds of occasions. So if you really want to understand truly someone's view, it's not enough to just say to them, what do you think about this? Or where do you come down on this? But you have to dig deeper, and you have to say, how did you reach that? Walk me through your thinking process. Where did that come from? And you have to go even deeper than that and say, can you give me some examples, like you just did when you asked me for an example? Or a lot of times, this is where stories come in. People will sometimes say, what's your data or what's your evidence? But not everyone can translate what they know into data and evidence. So you can also say, tell me some stories of what you've seen in your life that leads you to that conclusion. So there's a whole set of questions to really understand where those people are coming from. There's also questions to invite their best ideas. How might we do this differently? What ideas do you have? What advice, what suggestions do you have? There's also questions that we can ask to help us know how our own stories and ideas are landing with other people. Just by saying, what's your reaction to that? How does that land with you? What might I be missing? What am I overlooking, etc.? So there's a set of questions that can really get to the heart of what someone really thinks and feels, and truly invite the full totality of their stories and their human experience. But once we pose those questions, it really comes down to, do we actually listen? And how well do we listen? This is where I love your metaphor of the antenna. And what is the antenna tuning to? Because I think in many ways that's what listening is about. Is it how are we tuning our antenna to the other person? And oftentimes we think we're listening when we're not really listening. We think we're good at listening, but we're missing so much. For the book, I interviewed professional listeners. So, for example, journalists. I interviewed one journalist, Jenny Anderson, who told me a story that whenever she interviews someone she's writing a story about, she will record that interview if she can, and she'll replay it 2, 3, 4 times afterwards. And every single time she hears something important that she didn't hear the previous time. And just imagine that most of the time we never do that. We just have that one interaction and we think we heard the person, but there's so much that we haven't heard. And in the book, I talk about a theory by actually a family therapist named David Cantor, who says we actually have to listen through 3 different channels. And I think this connects to maybe tuning our antenna through 3 different channels as well. One is the channel of what is the content of what someone's actually saying? What's the information they're literally conveying? But the second is what's the emotion that they're conveying at the same time? And the third is what actions are they taking while they're speaking with us as well? And most of us, I think, are drawn to one channel or the next, or the other over another. I, for example, typically start by being drawn to the content of what somebody's saying, but we can train ourselves to listen through all three channels, and we can literally triple the amount that we're hearing from people. And so that's part of what we talk about with listening to learn.
Oh God, I want to have an hour conversation on this.
Yes.
Yeah, because so as an Italian, you know, we're famous to speak with our hands, right? And we're very expressive, and sometimes I go on different culture or in the age of Zoom, right? You know, you don't see that. We see we are the presenter on the news, and you miss a lot. Just somebody crossing the legs, or the way they move, or the empathy into the conversation and knocking, you know, moving your head. That's why it makes it so much easier to have a podcast when we can look at each other.
That's right. That's right.
Like I remember learning English at the beginning of my time. Making the first phone call in English was tragic. I had no idea what, you know, when you learn a language, you don't have the is he smiling? Is he moving their eyes? Is it doing? My God, he's just not understanding absolutely anything of what I say. So I mean,
yes,
it's really, really powerful to me. When you look at somebody on stage, on a TED stage or a keynote, there is a lot in the way that they move.
Absolutely,
right.
And I think especially in this day and age where we are interacting across cultures so much,
right,
that we can miss each other's signals, because in one culture this might mean some one thing, but it might mean something totally different in another culture as well.
True.
There's some interesting research on how often people over rely on nonverbal communication and get it wrong, and they actually make the wrong inferences based on that. And so it's important to ask and to say, you know, this is what you're feeling right now. This is what, you know, how should I interpret this expression that you have right, you know, on your face?
Yeah. Double check. How many times we go by assumption, right?
Exactly. Even with me, sometimes when I'm thinking really hard, my face might, be a little bit, look more very serious. And sometimes people think I must be angry with them. But really, I'm just thinking really hard about what they have to say right now. And so you do have to check.
Really, really, really good advice. That may be one of my favorite of all.
Should I talk about the last step of the ask approach? Yeah. So this is, I think this is the most important of all, which it's called reflect and reconnect. And this is really what makes the difference between having the conversation and nothing happens versus having the conversation and we learn and change and take action. And this idea of reflection, I think, is a lost art. Some people think that reflection is something that only, you know, monks do in a monastery or on a mountain, but really reflection is a skill and a process that we can all do. And it's really about taking what did we hear from somebody else and turning it over in our minds in a structured way to say, how does this influence my thinking? What is different in my own story based on what I heard? What steps can I take based on what I heard? And is there anything that I heard that I really want to take in at a very deep level to look at my deeper stuff, my assumptions about life, my biases, my ways of being, etc. And if we can take what we heard from other people and really reflect and turn it through that way, oftentimes it helps to do that through journaling or with the help of a friend or a coach or sometimes even a therapist. We can really get the most important wisdom out of other people. But it's important to not just stop there. That's why I call it reflect and reconnect. It's essential to go back to the other person and say, here's what I took from what you said. Because in doing that, you know, it's a way of acknowledging them and thanking them and letting them know that what they did mattered and that they really, you know, impacted us. But it's also a chance for us to correct if we took the wrong thing away. For them, gives them a chance to say, actually, I didn't mean for you to take this away. I didn't mean to say that kind of thing. And it also just increases the chances that they're going to want to continue to engage and share with us over time, because it shows them that it was worthwhile to do that. So that's the last component of the ask approach: reflect and reconnect.
It may be also one of the hardest, maybe too.
I agree.
I think because you're kind of like putting yourself on the line to really go back to that person and say, okay, did I really get it right? And again, maybe the fear can come in at that point and be like, I don't want to look the person like the person that didn't understand what he was trying to say. So are you suggesting that re-asking the same question may be possible and smart to do, maybe from a different angle?
Yeah, but I think I'm particularly saying, especially if they've answered your question already, I'm maybe saying to start by saying, here's what I heard, and here's how I made sense of it, and here's what I took away from it, and here's how I'm going to change and grow. Here's how it's gonna enrich myself. And I wanted to just share that with you, but also ask you, do you have reactions to that? And is there something more or different that you would want me to take away from our interaction as well?
Yeah. It can be a very humbling moment to be
absolutely. Yeah, as a leader, I've tried to do that with others when they've shared feedback with me, and it can feel vulnerable. It can feel scary because in some ways it's exposing like I didn't know something and now I'm changing and I've reflected deeply on it. But every time I do it, I'm consistently pleasantly surprised by people's reaction to it. They want to know that they've made a difference.
Yeah, and I see all these 5 points not having, of course, a life on its own, but they're all interconnected.
Exactly.
Right? So there is it's kind of like you get to 5, you start again, but then you throw curiosity in any one of these. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. I'm like, yep, but that they're all interconnected.
They're interconnected, and just like any framework or model, it's never as simple as it looks like it is on paper. It's messier, but I totally agree with you. These are each 5 practices that we can master in isolation, but when we implement them, we put them together and they interact.
So I know that this is not the Redefining Society podcast where I talk about technology and society. But before we start talking, we said that maybe we will touch on AI.
Yeah.
But also, I really want to touch on social media.
Yes.
When our conversation, when our question or reaction may happen in front of many other people, followers, in public, and so I think you just become even more harsh, and social media are harsh.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
what's your take on that?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, one is that I think that unfortunately social media too often makes it harder for us to be curious, because the people that we follow and friend and tend to agree with us. And so we end up in these echo chambers where we're just being reinforced of our own position. And that's one of the killers of curiosity is that we're just surrounded by people who tell us and also put pressure on us to sort of perform something that agrees with them as well. And then I also think that when there is a disagreement, especially out in public, the whole thing is just more pressurized. And I would love to see more often people on social media just posing questions and saying, tell me more about what makes you think that. And thank you. I learned something from what you said. And just leave it at that. And we don't have to fight it back.
There is a lot of question, non-question in social media.
Exactly. Especially attack questions.
It's not like you don't agree with me. It's more like, you don't agree with me?
That's right. That's right.
You want to
What's
fight?
wrong with you? Yeah.
Exactly.
And
there, the tone of voice, right? That we really change the question.
Tone matters hugely.
Yeah. How about AI? Let's get a little sprinkle of that too.
Yes. So I mean, I would say that first of all, there's so many skills and tasks that AI is taking over and is able to do better in many cases than humans. But I don't think that asking questions and truly learning of one another is something that AI will ever be able to do in the same way that humans can do. I think it is a uniquely human thing to do. But what's cool and what I have found is that AI can actually help us do this better. So if you put into ChatGPT or any AI bot something like, I'm angry at my blank because, or I think this politician is terrible. And then you put in this one question, what might I be missing? What you can get back is all kinds of little provocations that will challenge you to get more curious. So that's one way I've found it to be really helpful. It can also be very helpful if you put in, I'm frustrated about this, or I'm having a challenge with this person. What are some questions that I can ask the person? And it will generate a whole set of questions, many of which you've never thought to ask. They won't all be perfect, but there's some really interesting questions there. And when I've done that I thought, wow, I never would have thought to ask this question. So those are a couple ways that AI can actually help us do the thing that I think is most uniquely human.
Yeah, it's definitely not the best storyteller. That's for sure.
Right.
When it comes to creativity, I get actually really pissed at it, but I use it as brainstorming.
Uh-huh.
And
then we
that's
can do the
good.
same way on the question and
Oh
curiosity
yeah,
side
I mean,
as well.
I tried. I have this conversational style. As you know, I didn't give you my question because I don't want to know, right? I just want to have a conversation. Whatever comes in my mind, hopefully it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't. But if I wanted to, I could have got your bio, your book, feed it to ChatGPT and say, give me 10 questions for Jeff. And they would have been pretty good.
Yeah.
But they would have been pretty dry too.
Exactly.
But maybe one would have been like, oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe I can go with
I didn't think about that one. I can spin it a little bit.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's a good approach. Yeah. So what's your take on that using it as a teacher where I can see it's either, especially at the beginning, either you're on the one that refuse it, no way, not going to come in my classroom, or yeah, I welcome it, just do everything with it. Of course, truth usually is in between, but
yes.
What's your
I'm definitely not in the camp of just ban it. It's not good. Yeah. I just think that it's everywhere and we can't avoid it. And I have 2 kids of my own. I see them both using it in very creative ways. My daughter uses it as a thought partner for herself and for essays, like she, not to write the essay for her, but just to help her think through ideas and expand her thinking. And I think that's great. And so if we were to ban that, we would take away, I think, what's a really valuable tool. My son uses it a lot for coding. He actually uses it to practice his Spanish. He talks back and forth with it as well. Cool. Obviously, there's ethical issues, and we don't want kids just using it to write their essays. And we've got to continue to help kids think for themselves and write for themselves, etc. But I'm in the camp, and this is what my organization Transcend thinks a lot about when we think about education innovation. Of how can we use it for good?
Very cool. I would love for you to come back on my other show and we can dig deeper into.
I'd love that.
The Transcend and the use of education. And I mean, it's all about changing society and redefining. We can't stick with the same rule while, the tools are different. Right?
Exactly.
So,
exactly. Let's do that.
So that's an open invitation and I would love to do that. To end this conversation, there's a question I usually ask, which is, when you use a book, who do you have in mind, and who do you think? Given that usually the answer is everybody, so don't give me that answer. But when you were writing the book, who was your audience? Who were you making it mostly for?
I do think that anyone who interacts with people has something to learn from people around them, but I was mostly writing it for people in organizations. So people who are either leaders or managers, whether that means they have formal authority or not, who really want to unlock the collective intelligence, the collective genius of the people around them and the people in their culture of organizations. Very cool.
Very cool. So the last question is, did I ask the right questions?
You asked beautiful questions. I loved your questions, especially when you were asking for examples and stories and all of it.
All right.
It was a real pleasure.
Okay, we didn't work this before, so I hope this is spontaneous. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate this so much that I can't wait to read the book. I would definitely do that. It's in my sociology of communication and interaction with people. It's what I love. And definitely looking forward to this. For everybody listening, there will be all the notes to connect with Jeff, his website, link to the book, and anything that Jeff wants to share with us. And probably while you're listening to this, it's just going to be a few days before the book is out. And if you're listening to this after, because it's not that I'm going to remove it, then you can probably buy the book. So That's great. Jeff, a real pleasure.
Thank you, Marco. I love this conversation. Look forward to more. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Everybody stay tuned. Keep that antenna tuned in the right direction and ask questions and think. That's a good thing. Bye-bye, everybody.